Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. You guys know who I am, and you know what I like to do on the show. Say it with me. I want to enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. The scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on a fire. And that's what we want to do today. We want to get you fired up about my guest. I'll be spending time today with Griff Ruby, and we'll be talking about his book, Sede, Vacante. So, you know what I'm going to tell you to do. Go on, get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Hello, Griff. Thank you so much for joining me here on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I cannot wait to talk about your book today. Now, I realize that I may be introducing you to some new folks out there. So before we get started, I want to ask you, tell us a little bit about yourself. What makes you you?
Well, let's see. I was born in 1958. I managed to find the faith without the luxury of having had a religious upbringing. And even worse, at a time when it seems like Catholicism itself had pretty much lost its identity. So this writings here, reflect many years of research and discovery and exploration into just trying to get to the root of what is the source of right and wrong, and what is how should people be in terms of what's right. Well, what's right and wrong. I just said it already. Anyway, so that's been my goal, and then I've been trying to express what I've discovered.
Mhm. Now, being an author, is that something that you've always wanted to do, or did you find that this was just one of the best ways to share your information and research?
Especially, although I've had some inklings along about the idea of maybe being an author, but that's always been kind of more of a pipe dream than anything else. But this is something that's so important and needed to be shared somehow, and there's just so much to present that book form is the best way to put it. And so that's what I've been doing.
I can definitely understand that. Now, for listeners who may not be familiar with the title, we realize that we have listeners from around the world. I have to ask, when it comes to the title of your book, why did you pick this phrase to be the title? Why was it most appropriate?
Okay, so we're talking Sede Vacante, and it's actually part two. But this is the book that I've been least interviewed because we always want to start with the basic stuff, but I'll get to that later on. Sede Vacante is just Latin for the chair is vacant. And that particular is talking about the chair of Peter, which is to say, despite some very superficial appearances to the contrary, there is no living successor to the Apostle Peter at this time. And that, in a nutshell, is kind of what the subject matter is of the book.
Mhm, mhm. Now, when it comes to those that would be your target audience, and I try to ask this of everyone that I interview, would you say that your book is appropriate for someone as young as high school, like that 14, 15, 16-year-old? Or do they
Well,
need to be perhaps college age, a little bit older? Do they need more life experience or more faith experience to be able to follow along?
life experience and faith experience is a good thing. And obviously, the more mature a person is, probably the more ready they might be. But I know some very, very intellectual people in high school age and so forth who could be surprisingly ready for a lot of these kinds of things because just individuals are different. So I don't prefer to set an age group. If it's too old for you, you'll probably look at this and just to be too bored to pursue it any further. That's fine. Come back later when when you're ready for this stuff. I'll leave it at that.
Mhm. Now, I'm a firm believer that authors present their book in the way in which we should consume it, meaning page first through page last. However, I do know that many readers, and I love a few of them, that like to do reader's choice. They want to open the book and start where they like, or they might even read the last page first to see if it piques their interest. So I want to ask, is there a most proper way to start your book? Should it be first page first, or is it more of a reader's choice?
It really is pretty much start at the first page, but there's also another part of the context. Um, at the risk of jumping ahead and maybe anticipating the first of my real questions, okay, what is the proper context of this book? Well, it already has a title that says part two, which should immediately imply that there is therefore a part one. And that's for another discussion, which I've had in other interviews. Perhaps you and I might have a chance to revisit that. It'd be nice. But right now I'm kind of, well, I need to work one thing at a time, and I wanted to do this one. So, but obviously that it would come after part one. Now, that isn't to say some people might not find themselves entertained by some of the stuff in part two, especially when we get to a fairly large appendix, which also one of the questions will be about, which is what kind of ideas have people come up with to explain our situation. But basically, it's meant to be read in the sequence of one and two. And then even before part one, it's kind of also expecting that a person should be familiar with the traditional Catholic milieu in a general way, which they can get from another book of mine called The Resurrection of the Roman Catholic Church. But there are other books that talk about the things that have gone on. And it's like if you're basically familiar with all of that, then it's time for part one, which then prepares you for part two. So it's really meant to be read in context, but obviously it's a standalone book.
Mhm. Now, this book focuses on key documents that are a part of the Vatican, too, if I understand correctly. Why do you
Mhm.
believe that this particular document is so important in understanding the current state of the church? And I ask you in the context of, for those that are not Catholic, why is this important?
Well, for those who are not Catholic, they may vaguely remember that back in the 1960s, there was this great big council, and it was a lot of news at the time, and they called it Vatican Council II because they held it in Vatican City, which is located in the districts of Rome and Italy. And so it was this gigantic meeting, and it was supposed to be to discuss certain things. And well, let's just say that it got hijacked. Now, that's a story for another time and another place. But the bottom line is the document that I'm focusing on in my Sede Vacante is a document within which something very extraordinary and unusual happened that in fact had a massive and devastating result that few have really fully understood, comprehended. They see that things are wrong. You know, the patient is incredibly ill, but what? They don't know quite exactly how to identify the disease agent. And I believe the disease agent started in that document.
Interesting, interesting. Now, it is time for us to take a very short break. But before we do, we want to remind everyone, of course, this book is available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. But, Griff, if someone would like to reach out to you personally, what is your website?
The website is Mr. Ubi Petrus. So that would, now Ubi Petrus is um, it's a run together of two Latin words. Ubi is for where or where is, and Petrus is Peter. Where is Peter? And so I've been kind of using that name. And then I say Mr. everywhere because Ubi Petrus has been used by others too. So that makes it a little more confusing. But if I go just Mr. MR and then UBIPETRUS and then com. So MrUbiPetrus.com. That's the site for these books. And that's, you know, It also, you can click on a contact, you can fill out a form, and then if you have something, it'll email me someone or a question or a comment. And so far I haven't had much traffic,
Alrighty.
but I'll try to get back to people if I get traffic
Alrighty.
in a hopefully fairly
Alrighty.
reasonable time.
Alrighty. Alrighty, everyone. Now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Butch-Tester. My guest today is Griff Ruby. We are going to jump back into our conversation. Now, you mentioned that part 2 builds upon 16 doctoral categories that were established in part 1. What are some of the most significant foundations from the first book that readers need to understand before they explore part 2, that they can fully
Basic things to
understand
know
book
from part
2?
1. Okay, it's actually 16 doctrinal categories, and that just has to do with the various basic doctrines of the church. And within that doctrine, or doctrinal categories, I should say, there would be particular doctrines that have sometimes seemed like, are these doctrines still true? I maintain that they are. But how is that so? And actually, I do a pretty good job, I think, of trying to show how that is the case. But let's just get an example. We begin with the indefectibility of the church, that the church cannot be destroyed or corrupted. We move on to the infallibility of the Pope, and then that the church has authority, that the church has a visible presence. That is to say, you can always recognize it as a identifiable societal entity. So having that visibility, it displays itself and demonstrates itself with what we call the marks. And each mark is another doctrinal category, that it is one, that it is holy, that it is Catholic, that it is apostolic. And furthermore, that the church has a miraculous survival that it has had from the very beginning, despite a variety of activities of history and so forth. And then we drill into smaller, more subtle categories that that would be difficult to explain in a short answer. And then there are some deductions that follow from that. And when you're familiar with that, then we get into volume 2, which gets to the central question that needs to be solved. So, as is indicated, obviously this is meant to be read after you've read some other things. Have you read any kind of book about the traditional Catholicism? There's a number around, including my Resurrection of the Roman Catholic Church book, but there are others. Then there's the part 1 where we've gone through that. And then when you've done that, you're really ready for part 2.
Mm-hmm. Now, for the person who says, "Ooh, I like what you are saying," and they want to make sure that they understand the context of which you are presenting your information. We have many guests on that are theologians, they are seminarians, so they're sharing from a very scholarly point of view. But we also have guests that are just simple Janes and Johns. They're just lay people who are deep into their faith and they are sharing their discoveries. They had questions. They researched it, and now they're sharing it in a book. If they've had questions, others have questions. Which perspective should we understand how you are presenting this to us? Are we going along on the journey of your discovery, or are you sharing your official education with us?
I would have to say this would have to be a research project because in fact, in all of my books, my own life really doesn't factor into it at all. If I ever have a part 3 someday, I might discuss that a little bit. But as it stands now, this is really about my research findings. All of my books are research findings. My Resurrection was a research throughout a whole movement that had through which data is incredibly scattered. The next volume, part 1, is drawn heavily from selection of very good, clear, basic but solid and rather detailed theological sources and showing what they teach, allowing all these teachers who have all the more degrees that today really can't be validly held by anybody right now. And so that's what that,
Mhm,
so I'm sitting at the feet of all these great teachers and enabling my readers to do the same. So a
mhm,
significant
mhm,
content a percentage of that part one is all of that. Now we get to part two. In the course of part one, a problem has been raised and it needs to be answered. And so
mhm.
that's where we get to the next part.
Mhm, mhm. And we love it when people share their research with us. It makes us all just a little bit smarter in doing so. Instead of being in a very small space, we are able to grow as the authors share their knowledge base. So I thank you for doing so. Now, one of the major themes in your work is the question of authority and hierarchy within the church. How does your interpretation address these issues when it comes to today's landscape? Has much changed? Are things the same? What's your interpretation there?
Well, authority is key to the whole way the church is set up. That helped Jesus Christ set it up. He didn't just say some nice things and hope people will remember him. He really did specifically go out of his way to establish an identifiable church. He put somebody in charge, the Apostle Peter, from his own lifetime. And the clear indication is that the Apostle Peter is meant to have those who will succeed him in leading the church down through the ages. So he set this church up, and authority just runs through the whole warp and woof. But today we enter a weird situation where what looks like authority has in fact been gravely abused to drive Catholics away from the true faith and into all kinds of weird stuff that has no business coming from a pulpit or anything like that.
Mhm.
And that has to be solved. Has authority disappeared? If it hasn't
Mhm.
disappeared, who's got it and how did they get it?
Ah, good question. Now, is that something that you expound on within your book? I can hear someone going, "Ooh, that sounds intriguing." Do you expound on that a little bit more?
Well, I think that's definitely what you'll get because up until this Vatican II that I've mentioned earlier, it was very straightforward. You had the Pope, he was infallible. You could go to him for any answer that hasn't been solved.
Mhm,
So, in a question, even a doctrinal point was the Blessed Virgin Mary bodily assumed into heaven? It's surprising how far along things went before the Pope said, "Yes, yea, verily, that is the case." And so we know that now. It's the subtle hints for a lot of these things generally come from Scripture, or at least the early fathers. So they are things that were known and believed by the early Christians, but maybe not as explicitly or as clearly, or maybe over the years questions get raised, doubts get raised, and sometimes the Pope has to speak up and say, yes, this is the case, however obscure or difficult this may look to prove, just directly from the Bible. So
mhm,
this is what authority is. It tells us what we are to believe and what is the right way to act and what isn't. And and that we are sinners and so many other things that are common to the whole Christian message, in fact, and what we need to do about that.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
So authority runs through the warp and woof of all of this, as I've said, and it's probably about the key theme, really, throughout actually all of my books.
mhm, mhm. Now, many Catholics and Christians alike recognize that there have been significant debate about Vatican II over the decades. What are some of the most common misconceptions that you feel that really need to kind of be brought to the surface or have a little bit more light shined on them that you address or clarify in the book?
Well, I would have to say that we are One of the biggest things that people fail to realize is that what Vatican II actually did was create a schism between two now parallel societies. Historically, schisms have generally been geographical. Say the churches in the East back in 1054 suddenly decided that they're not going to be subject to the Pope. Or again, in the 16th century England, the king decided to have all the priests and bishops sign a document basically making the king their pope, and that's it, and getting the real pope in Rome out of the equation. So these kinds of breaks were kind of geographical. Now we have a break that isn't so much geographical as it is societal. So it really has created a new separate society in parallel to the church, which, unlike the real church, is not protected by God's promises. God promises to watch over his church, keep it on the straight and narrow, and so forth. Well, his real church still exists, but now only as one of two societies that are rival and in parallel to each other. And the other society, which sadly has managed to run off of the vast majority of what had been the Catholic Church's resources, they are not that society. They have explicitly separated from being that society, and God does not protect it. And we see that. It was so bad that even in the 1960s, people seeing that and thinking, oh, the church is a mess. Well, the real church is just really small and hard to find. But what had the resources of the church having been taken over by this new society was going to pot. And so all the things that the Catholic Church cannot do by divine guarantee, this society can just go and do willy-nilly. And so it was so bad that even by the mid-60s, people were asking, is God dead? Because it was like God wasn't doing anything to stop, Father or whatever from turning into a clown and just making what was supposed to be this solemn Mass into a clown show. And nobody could stop this. Everyone could see this is bad, this is horrible. And people left church, and a lot of people lost faith in that time because it was like, it looked like we're the boss, we're the big cheese, and we're telling you to put on your clown suit and, join the fun. And it's like, wait a minute, is that, that can't be right.
Right.
And it isn't right. And it isn't the Catholic Church itself that's doing that. And I would say that's a key point. And I go through and prove that. But where did the break happen? This brings us back to Lumen Gentium. That's where the actual break. Just as the break between the East and the rest came when Michael Cerularius wrote a letter excommunicating the Pope and basically saying, nope, from now on, the most you can be, Mr. Pope, is just another patriarch, like I'm a patriarch, and my fellow patriarch from Antioch and this other place and that place are all patriarchs, and we're all equal. You can't order us around or have any authority over us. We're just all equals, which actually just, shattered the church, so to speak. But what it really did is that the real church simply continued on with the Pope in Rome, and these others had in fact separated. And in effect created a brand new church or group of church, the East Orthodox. And again in England, the same thing. The king had them sign this document, and they had to, or they'd be sent to the Tower and killed, and replaced with somebody else who will sign the document, making called the Declaration of Royal Supremacy, in case you want the reference. And once again, same thing. All of a sudden, all those resources that the Catholic Church had built up in England effectively taken over by what amounts to a brand new church operating in parallel to the real Catholic Church, which also, by the way, also had a minority presence in England, even right from the get-go.
I tell people all the time that church history and the Bible are great, great books to read. Read it to place themselves within the story and go along on the journey.
It's always been the struggle for the true church and the true way of life, and for that which our Lord Jesus Christ founded so very long ago, and to be able to connect into that. Now, our circumstance, which I call a Sede Vacante circumstance, which the title takes its book, that is a rather unusual situation that basically came to exist within many of our lifetimes, including my own. The church normally always had a pope, other than a pope would die, and it might take some while, usually a few days, sometimes a few years, to replace one pope with another pope to succeed him, and so forth. But we're in a different situation where the apparent forms for creating popes seem to be being followed, and yet every single time they have consistently failed to result in what would exhibit the normal and proper characteristics that a pope, by divine definition, would have to display. So it's what went wrong? Well, in a tiny nutshell, what went wrong is that they have not been set not over the real Catholic Church, but over this parallel society. And so they're no more infallible than whatever, the King of England or the President of the United States or any other nation you care to name would be, theologically infallible, which is to say, not at all. That ain't their
Mm.
job.
Ooh, I love it when you give us something to think about, something to chew on, and that just, in my opinion, is what a really good book does. It not only informs you, but it causes you to pause. You don't put the book down because you don't want to read it anymore. You put the book down because you have something to think about. And I love it that you are doing that. Now, Griff, I really and truly want to say thank you for coming on and sharing your book with my audience. I think that you are definitely going to have some new readers along the way. My audience is a group of folks that like to learn, to debate, to challenge where they are in their current place so that they can become better. Now, of course, we know that this book is available on Amazon and wherever books are sold. But if someone wants to reach out to you, if you could give us your website one more time.
Mr. Booby Petrus,
I,
MRUBIPETRUS.com.
I love it. I love it. Griff, thank you again for coming on and sharing your book with us here on Daily Spark with Dr. And
Thank you
listener,
for having me.
absolutely. And listeners, thank you for spending some time with us here as well. You could have been anywhere and you chose to spend it with us today. And I thank you for doing so. I hope that we have once again enlightened, inspired, and empowered you. As always, may the Lord continue to shine his face upon you. May you receive his grace and his mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember that you are blessed in the Lord. Have a great day, everyone.